poverty and give them a route out.
Whether you're going to change the definition. I can see you may change the way in which you try to bring about that.
You know, there is legislation on the statute book which we you know, didn't oppose, so and the definition is set out in that statute.
I do think there are some additional things we should look at in terms of poverty, which is the time people spend in severe poverty, and also the gap, as it were, between severe poverty and a better quality of life. I do think that that is something that needs a lot of attention, because it's persistent, deep poverty that people are trapped in that I think we need a particular amount of attention to. And I think that's something that Ian Duncan-Smith will be taking forward in his department. James.
James Kirkup from Telegraph. Perhaps there's two things. First of all, in the defence section here, you're committing yourself to reviewing Trident, but unlike your manifesto, there's no mention of on a commitment to a continuous at-sea deterrent based on submarines. So, is it possible that this document will allow your government to replace Trident with a nuclear weapon system that's not submarine-based, that doesn't provide continuous at-sea deterrent?
The short answer to that is no. Our commitment is, as set out in the manifesto, that this. I mean, if it wasn't continuous at sea, it wouldn't be a proper deterrent. But the words in there are very clear about what the Liberal Democrats are still entitled, quite rightly, to do, which is for them to pursue alternatives. But it's very clear in terms of the commitment. You had another question.
There's a question on Europe earlier on. Can you just clarify? Presumably, your position is that you would oppose any change in the existing EU treaties that would move the European Union further towards economic governance?
Yes, we don't believe there should be further transfers of power in that way. That's something that the coalition has agreed about. We want to make what is there now work better. We'll be positively engaged in the European Union, but we don't believe there should be further transfers of power. And there's also this referendum lock in terms of further transfers of power. But as a sign of how we want to be engaged and involved, later today I'll be going to France and having a meeting with President Sarkozy, and tomorrow a meeting with Chancellor Merkel as part of that process. Let's have a couple more. James Landale, we'll go over here.
Prime Minister, in the months and years ahead, you are going to need the support of your backbenchers. So why have you chosen now to pick a fight with them over the way they organise themselves? And secondly, on a point of detail, can you tell us when you expect a referendum to be held on electoral reform?
Right, OK. On the issue of the 1922 committee, I'm not picking a fight with anyone. I'm asking a very sensible and serious question, which is, I think it would be better to continue as we did in the last Parliament with the 1922 committee, the Conservative Parliamentary Committee, being a committee of the whole party, not front bench, not back bench, but not front bench, the whole party. And I think that's very important. We are going to have clearly difficult times ahead, times when we have to have very good conversations within the party, raising all sorts of issues. And I think it's much better to have one organisation, one party, that has one meeting where, to coin a phrase, we're all in it together. And I think there's very...
That might be right, but your party is angry about it now. They think they've been bounced. There was no consultation over it. They are going through your rule book at the moment to see if this is potentially subject to judicial review. I mean, you know, the consequence of this is you have an angry backbench party at the moment.
Well, there's a vote. It's a decision for the parliamentary party. There's a vote. This is the right way to proceed. And I profoundly believe that having a single party meeting, bringing the party together, is the right thing to do. And I believe in leading from the front. If you think something's right to do, don't wait for it to be proved a few months into the government when backbench and frontbench aren't talking to each other properly. Get on and do it and ask the party to make that change. That's the decision I took. The party has a vote. The party will make a decision. I'll abide by that decision whichever way it goes, but I think it's much better to have a single party organisation in Parliament. I think there was a pretty good reception for what I said last night. Let's have a couple more. Gentleman here. Oh, sorry. Referendum, that is something that we are discussing. Clearly, in the bill that will bring in the referendum, there are very important points from our point of view in terms of equalisation of seats, a smaller House of Commons. All these things need to be done together. But the exact timing of the referendum we will be discussing and we'll be announcing. And I hope not before too long you'll have clarity on that. Gentleman here.
Lawrence Norman at Dow Jones. Just to be clear on the banking sector, is the scrapping of the FSA now officially off the agenda, and could there still be a separate consumer protection agency?
George.
Well, the central principle behind the reforms the Conservative Party put forward is there, which is that the Bank of England does macroprudential regulation as oversight of microprudential, but we are discussing exactly how that is delivered through the institutions and the impact that has on the future of the FSA and indeed a consumer protection agency.
Thank you. Let's have Gary Gibbon from Channel 4, and then we'll call it a day.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Just back on what Patrick was asking about these postal primaries, quite a lot of your old war horses in the party were rampaging around last night. You haven't got in mind to try and dislodge some of them, perhaps, and launch a postal primary in their seat, have you? And
no, the short answer to that is no. The idea is when a relatively safe seat is selecting a new candidate, this should be an option that's available. Many constituencies would like to do this, but what stops them is there is a cost, because you're sending a ballot paper to every home. But I think in the interests of opening up our democracy, making our parties more democratic, consulting and getting more people involved in politics, this is a good step forward. It was a success of what happened in South Devon, where Sarah Wollaston, someone who'd worked as a general practitioner for 20 years, well, I think the sort of person that actually the House of Commons will really benefit from having someone like that. I thought it proved its worth, and as someone who'd championed it, I actually went out and raised the money for it myself. I think it's a very good thing to do, and that's why I was delighted when Nick and the Liberal Democrats took up the idea, and it's an offer to all parties, but no horse or war horse or other has a fear.
And as well, you were on a mission with your party to drag it to the centre ground. Nick Clegg was on a mission, I think, with your party, Nick Clegg, to drag it to somewhere you thought was slightly saner, perhaps. Some people would say to the right. In the interests of transparency and openness of this new coalition government, both of you would admit, wouldn't you, that this coalition plays beautifully into your individual strategies for changing your party profiles?
I can genuinely say on my own behalf, and I think Nick would say the same thing, is we were both put in circumstances we had not predicted or expected or planned for. I mean, actually, if someone had told me a year ago there was going to be a hung parliament, I would have said, yes, that is a very strong possibility. I always felt winning for the Conservatives, 120 seats in one go. You're talking about Mission Impossible. I suppose that would have been a bridge too far to mix film metaphors. But I wouldn't have expected a coalition. And so what we both did was respond to the circumstances that the electorate delivered. And for my own part, when I woke up on the Friday morning after a very short sleep after election night, I was very clear that the right thing to do was to aim high for a coalition government that could deliver the things that we are talking about today, because that was in the national interest. I always knew it would have difficult, bumpy parts along the way, particularly in terms of convincing people, including in my own party, this was the right thing to do. But in the end, in politics, the right thing to do is the right thing to do is the right thing to do. And I think people can now see the strength of argument behind what has been done. And that was what drove me, and I'll let Nick speak for himself.
I mean, David just talked about what happened to bring about the circumstances in which the coalition agreement was signed, all of which I completely agree with. But I think people perhaps will be too ready to underestimate the significance of this kind of document. All governments, even if they're single-party party governments, as we know from the last 10 years, will have differences in them, different schools of thought, different sort of people pulling in different directions. The big difference about this one is that we're actually working through those differences right from the outset, because we have to. And therefore, I think, what you'll see in the coming months and years is a far greater clarity and stability and consistency in government than you get from previous governments, where all of those differences were being fought out behind closed doors and were actually pulling the government from pillar to post. I think having, if you like, front-loaded all those difficult discussions, and some of them, you're right, are going to be looked out further through some reviews. Actually, what we will prove, and this is what we now need to prove, that is why today is all about now getting on with it, getting on with actually governing, is what we will prove to you now is that whilst the circumstances in which this government had been created are exceptional, we will provide a degree of consistency and clarity and stability which even single-party governments have been unable to deliver in the past.
That's right. That's what we have to prove. I mean, frankly, if anyone wants to write the story, oh, well, look, this policy has been changed,